Marcus had been living alone in the dense forests of northern Canada for 3 years. At just 16 years old, he had learned to survive in ways most people could never imagine. His parents died in a car accident when he was 13, and after bouncing between foster homes that never felt like home, he made the decision that changed his life forever. He ran away to the wilderness, choosing the harsh but honest life of nature over the uncertainty of human care. The boy had built himself a small cabin using fallen logs and branches, hidden deep within a grove of pine trees near a freshwater stream. His days followed a routine that kept him alive through scorching summers and brutal winters. He woke before dawn to check his snares and traps, hoping to find rabbits, squirrels, or other small game that would provide his meals. He knew which berries were safe to eat, which roots could be boiled into nutritious soup, and how to smoke meat to preserve it for the long winter months. Marcus had grown strong and lean from his life in the wild. His dark hair had grown long and shaggy, and his clothes were a patchwork of animal skins and salvaged fabric. His hands were rough and calloused from constant work, but his eyes remained bright and intelligent. He had taught himself to read animal tracks, to predict weather changes by watching the sky, and to move silently through the forest like a shadow. The forest was his teacher, his home, and his protector. He had learned to respect the dangerous animals that shared his territory. Bears roamed these woods along with wolves, mountain lions, and other predators. Marcus had encountered them all at various times, and each meeting had taught him something valuable about survival. He carried a handmade spear and a sharp knife that had belonged to his father, tools that had saved his life more than once. Despite his solitary existence, Marcus sometimes felt the weight of loneliness. He would sit by his small fire in the evenings, listening to the sounds of the forest and remembering fragments of his old life. He missed having someone to talk to, someone to share his thoughts with. But he had convinced himself that this was better than the alternative. In the wild, he controlled his own destiny. There were no social workers, no strangers making decisions about his future, no temporary families who might send him away at any moment. On this particular morning in late spring, Marcus was following a deer trail that led deeper into unexplored territory. He had been tracking a small herd for 2 days, hoping to bring down one of the animals to provide meat for several weeks. The trail wound through thick underbrush and over rocky terrain that tested even his experienced feet. As he moved carefully through a cluster of dense bushes, a sound stopped him in his tracks. It was not the usual forest noise he had grown accustomed to. This was different, human, and filled with pain. Someone was crying, but it was mixed with sounds of distress that made his heart race. Marcus crouched low and moved toward the sound with extreme caution. In 3 years of wilderness living, he had never encountered another person in this remote area. The nearest town was over 40 miles away, and the terrain between here and civilization was treacherous. What could bring someone so deep into this dangerous territory? The crying grew louder as he approached a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. Through the branches, he could see movement, and what he discovered made him freeze with shock. A young woman, probably not much older than himself, was lying on the ground beneath a makeshift shelter of branches and leaves. She appeared to be in terrible distress, her body contorted with pain, her clothes torn and dirty. But what stunned Marcus most was the realization that she was pregnant, and from her cries and the way she was breathing, it seemed like she was about to give birth. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her long brown hair matted with sweat and debris. She looked like she had been surviving in the wild for days, possibly weeks, with no proper supplies or shelter. Marcus remained hidden, trying to process what he was seeing. How had this young woman ended up in such a remote location? Was she running from something or someone? Was she lost? The questions raced through his mind, but one thing was clear. She needed help, and there was nobody else around to provide it. The woman let out another cry of pain, and Marcus saw her body tense with what could only be labor contractions. She was going to give birth here, in the middle of the wilderness, with no medical help, no clean supplies, and no protection from the elements or the dangerous animals that hunted in these woods. For a moment, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the situation. He was just a teenager who had learned to survive alone, not someone trained to help deliver a baby. But as he watched the woman struggle, something inside him knew he could not walk away. His parents had raised him to help others when he could, and despite years of living like a wild animal, that part of his humanity remained strong. He took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing, making noise so he would not startle her completely. The woman's eyes went wide with fear when she saw him emerge from the forest. She tried to scramble backward, but another contraction hit her and she collapsed back onto the ground with a moan of pain. "Please do not hurt me," she whispered, her voice weak and hoarse. "I have nothing valuable. Just please leave me alone." Marcus raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I am not going to hurt you," he said softly, his own voice rough from lack of use. "My name is Marcus. I live in these woods. I want to help you." The woman stared at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She was young, maybe 18 or 19, with kind eyes despite her current state of terror and pain. "I am Sarah," she managed to say between breaths. "I think my baby is coming now. I do not know what to do." Marcus nodded and moved closer slowly, like he would approach a wounded animal. "I have never delivered a baby before," he admitted, "but I have helped animals give birth. The principles might be similar. We need to get you more comfortable and find clean water." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of relief. "I thought I was going to die alone out here," she whispered. "I have been lost for 5 days. I ran out of food 2 days ago, and the baby started coming this morning." As Marcus knelt beside her, he could see that she was wearing the remnants of regular street clothes, completely unsuitable for wilderness survival. Her sneakers were falling apart, and she had no proper equipment or supplies. Whatever had driven her into these remote woods must have been desperate circumstances. "We will get through this together," Marcus told her, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But first I need to know, are you running from someone dangerous? Is there anyone who might come looking for you who could hurt us?" Sarah shook her head quickly. "No, nobody dangerous. I was just lost and scared. I made some bad choices and ended up here by accident. I am not a criminal or anything like that." Marcus decided to trust her for now. The immediate priority was helping her through the birth, and then figuring out how to get both her and the baby to safety. But even as he began to organize his thoughts and plan what needed to be done, he heard sounds in the distance that made his blood run cold. Wolves were howling somewhere in the forest, and they sounded close. The pack that lived in this territory was large and aggressive, and they would be drawn to the scent of blood and the sounds of distress. Marcus realized that helping Sarah give birth was only the beginning of their problems. They were about to face dangers that could threaten all of their lives. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, and Marcus knew that darkness would bring even more predators out to hunt. Bears, mountain lions, and other dangerous animals became more active at night. If they were going to survive this, he would need to use every skill he had learned in 3 years of wilderness living. Sarah cried out again as another strong contraction hit her, and Marcus pushed aside his fears about the approaching dangers. Right now, there was a baby coming into the world, and 2 lives depending on his ability to help them through the next few hours. Everything else would have to wait. He looked around the clearing, assessing what he had to work with and what he would need to gather quickly. The shelter Sarah had built was barely adequate, and it would not protect them from determined predators. He would need to improve their defenses while also helping her through the birth process. Marcus had never imagined that his solitary life in the wilderness would lead to such a moment. But as he prepared to face the challenges ahead, he felt a sense of purpose he had not experienced since losing his parents. For the first time in 3 years, someone needed him, and he was determined not to let them down. The howling of the wolves grew closer, and Marcus knew their real test was just beginning. The birth of Sarah's baby would only be the first challenge in what promised to be a fight for survival that would push all of his wilderness skills to their absolute limit. Marcus worked quickly to gather everything they would need for the birth. He ran to the nearby stream and filled his water container with the cleanest water he could find, then used his knife to cut strips of cloth from his spare shirt to create clean bandages. He collected dry moss and soft pine needles that could serve as bedding, and built up the fire to provide warmth and light as the evening approached. Sarah was experiencing contractions that were getting stronger and closer together. Marcus had watched animals give birth many times during his years in the wilderness, and he tried to remember everything he had observed. The most important things were keeping everything as clean as possible, making sure the mother stayed warm, and being ready to help if complications arose. "How long have you been having the pains?" Marcus asked as he arranged the supplies he had gathered. "Since early this morning," Sarah panted. "But they are getting much worse now. I think the baby really wants to come soon." Marcus nodded and tried to look reassuring, even though he felt nervous about the enormous responsibility he was taking on. "Animals usually know what to do instinctively," he said. "I think humans probably have the same instincts. We will just help your body do what it knows how to do." As if to remind them of the dangers surrounding them, another howl echoed through the forest, much closer than before. Marcus estimated the wolf pack was probably less than a mile away. The scent of Sarah's distress and the approaching birth would be like a dinner bell to every predator in the area. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with new fear. "Wolves," Marcus answered honestly. "There is a pack that hunts in this territory. We need to be prepared for them and other animals that might be attracted to the sounds and scents here tonight." Sarah looked terrified. "Oh God, what are we going to do?" "I cannot run or fight in this condition." Marcus placed his spear and knife within easy reach and added more wood to the fire. "You focus on bringing your baby safely into the world," he said firmly. "I will handle everything else. I have been living here for 3 years, and I know how to deal with predators." Over the next several hours, Marcus alternated between helping Sarah through her labor pains and watching the perimeter of their small clearing for signs of approaching danger. He could hear movement in the forest around them, the soft padding of paws and the rustling of leaves that indicated they were being watched and evaluated by unseen hunters. Sarah was incredibly brave throughout the ordeal. Despite being exhausted, scared, and in tremendous pain, she followed Marcus's instructions and tried to stay calm. She told him pieces of her story between contractions, how she had been staying with a friend in a small town 40 miles away, how she had gotten lost during what was supposed to be a short hike, and how she had wandered deeper and deeper into the wilderness while trying to find her way back. "I was so stupid," she whispered, during a brief break between pains. "I thought I could handle a simple nature walk. I never imagined I could get so completely lost." Marcus shook his head. "You are not stupid. These woods are dangerous even for people who know them well. I have gotten lost plenty of times during my first months out here. The important thing is that you survived long enough for me to find you." As midnight approached, Sarah's labor intensified dramatically. Marcus could tell the baby was coming very soon. He had positioned himself where he could assist if necessary, while also keeping watch for predators. The fire was burning brightly, which would help keep most animals at a distance, but he knew that desperate or particularly bold predators might still approach. That was when he heard the sound that made his heart race with fear, the unmistakable growl of a large bear, somewhere very close to their clearing. Marcus had encountered bears many times, and he knew how to read their moods and intentions from their vocalizations. This one sounded aggressive and curious, probably a male drawn by the unfamiliar scents and sounds coming from their camp. "Marcus," Sarah gasped. "I think the baby is coming right now. I can feel it happening." Marcus was faced with an impossible choice. Sarah needed his help with the birth. But the approaching bear represented a deadly threat to all of them. He made a quick decision based on years of experience with dangerous wildlife. "Keep breathing and push when your body tells you to," he instructed Sarah. "I need to deal with something, but I will be right back." He grabbed his spear and moved toward the edge of the clearing where he had heard the bear. Sure enough, a massive black bear was standing at the tree line, probably weighing over 400 pounds. The animal was testing the air with its sensitive nose, trying to decide whether to investigate further or move on to easier prey. Marcus knew that running would be the worst possible choice. Bears could run much faster than humans, and movement might trigger the animal's chase instinct. Instead, he made himself look as large as possible, raising his spear above his head and speaking in a loud, firm voice. "Get out of here!" he shouted at the bear. "This is not the place for you tonight!" The bear stood up on its hind legs to get a better look at him, a sight that would have terrified most people. But Marcus had learned to read bear behavior, and he could see that the animal was more curious than aggressive at this point. It was trying to decide whether the potential food source was worth the risk of fighting this strange human. Behind him, Marcus could hear Sarah making the sounds that indicated her baby was being born. He could not turn around to help her, because that would mean taking his attention away from the bear, which could prove fatal for all of them. "Go on! Get moving!" Marcus continued to shout, waving his spear and making as much noise as possible. "There is nothing for you here!" The bear dropped back down to all fours and took a few steps closer. Marcus could see the intelligence in its small, dark eyes as it calculated the risks and benefits of approaching further. This was the most dangerous moment, when the animal was deciding whether to attack or retreat. That was when the baby's first cry pierced the night air. The sound seemed to surprise the bear as much as it thrilled Marcus. The animal's head snapped toward the direction of the cry, and Marcus could see its expression change. Bears were usually cautious around human babies, perhaps because the sound triggered some deep instinct that warned them away from human settlements. "That is right," Marcus said, speaking more quietly now but keeping his spear ready. "There is a human baby here now. You do not want any part of this situation. Move along." The bear seemed to consider this for another long moment, then turned and walked back into the forest. Marcus could hear it moving away through the underbrush, probably in search of easier and less complicated prey. Marcus hurried back to Sarah, who was holding a tiny, crying infant against her chest. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling with exhaustion and joy. "It is a girl," she whispered. "She is so small, but she seems healthy and strong." Marcus felt a wave of emotion that surprised him. After 3 years of living alone, seeing new life come into the world was overwhelming. The baby was indeed tiny, but she was crying vigorously and moving her little arms and legs. "She is beautiful," Marcus said softly. He had never held a newborn baby before, but when Sarah offered to let him take her for a moment, he accepted the precious bundle with careful hands. The baby felt impossibly fragile and light, but also warm and alive in a way that filled him with wonder. "We did it," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We actually did it. Thank you, Marcus. I could never have gotten through this without you." But their celebration was interrupted by sounds that chilled Marcus to the bone. The wolf pack he had been hearing all evening was now much closer, and they were clearly investigating the area around their clearing. Wolves were much more dangerous than bears in many ways, because they hunted in coordinated groups and were less likely to be intimidated by fire and loud noises. Marcus handed the baby back to Sarah and picked up his spear. "We have bigger problems now," he said quietly. "The wolves are here, and they are not going to be as easy to scare off as the bear was." Through the trees, Marcus could see eyes reflecting the firelight. The pack was surrounding their clearing, probably trying to figure out the best way to approach. Wolves were intelligent hunters that usually attacked from multiple directions at once. Sarah clutched her newborn daughter and looked up at Marcus with trust and fear. "What do we do?" Marcus was already moving, adding more wood to the fire and gathering burning branches that he could use as weapons. "We fight," he said simply. "I have faced wolves before, but never a whole pack. This is going to be the hardest thing I have ever done." The lead wolf, a large gray animal with intelligent yellow eyes, stepped into the edge of the clearing. It was testing Marcus, trying to gauge his strength and determination. Behind it, Marcus could count at least 6 other wolves moving through the shadows. Marcus knew that wolves typically avoided humans, but the scent of blood from the birth, combined with Sarah's weakened condition and the crying baby, presented what the pack probably saw as an easy opportunity for food. These animals were hungry and desperate, or they never would have approached so boldly. "Stay behind me and keep the baby quiet if you can," Marcus instructed Sarah. "Whatever happens, do not run. Running will trigger their chase instinct, and they will catch you immediately." The lead wolf took another step forward, and Marcus could see the predatory calculation in its eyes. This was going to be a fight for their lives. And Marcus knew that his 3 years of wilderness survival had been preparing him for exactly this moment. He raised his spear and stepped forward to meet the challenge, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Sarah and her baby would live to see another day. The wolves spread out in a classic hunting formation, and Marcus realized he was about to face the greatest test of his young life. The baby cried again, a sound that seemed to echo through the dark forest and announced to every predator in the area that helpless prey was waiting. Marcus tightened his grip on his spear and prepared to battle for the lives of 2 people who had become more important to him than his own survival. The lead wolf crouched low, preparing to spring, when Marcus made a decision that went against every survival instinct he had developed. Instead of waiting for the attack, he charged forward with his spear, shouting at the top of his lungs and waving a burning branch in his other hand. The unexpected aggression caught the wolves off guard. The lead wolf jumped backward, startled by Marcus's bold move, but the other pack members began to circle around, trying to get behind him where they could attack Sarah and the baby. Marcus spun around, keeping his burning branch and spear moving in wide arcs to create a barrier of fire and sharp metal. "Get away from them," he roared, his voice carrying all the authority he had gained from 3 years of facing down dangerous predators. One of the smaller wolves darted forward, trying to get past Marcus's defenses. Marcus jabbed with his spear, catching the animal in the shoulder. The wolf yelped and retreated, but it was not seriously injured. The rest of the pack grew more agitated, sensing that this human was more dangerous than they had expected. The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Marcus knew he could not keep up this level of intensity indefinitely, and the wolves seemed to sense his fatigue. They were patient hunters, willing to wait for their opponent to make a mistake or wear himself out. Behind him, Sarah was trying to keep the baby calm, but the infant could sense the tension and danger in the air. Her cries were getting louder, which only made the wolves more excited and aggressive. That was when Marcus remembered something his father had taught him about pack animals. They respected strength, but they also had a hierarchy. If he could defeat or seriously injure the lead wolf, the others might retreat rather than risk their own lives for an uncertain meal. Marcus focused his attention on the largest wolf, the gray alpha male that had first entered the clearing. He made direct eye contact with the animal, a gesture that wolves understood as a challenge for dominance. "You want to fight?" Marcus said quietly, speaking directly to the lead wolf. "Then let's finish this." The wolf seemed to understand that the situation had changed. This was no longer just about hunting prey. It had become a test of who was the stronger predator in this territory. The alpha wolf circled Marcus slowly, looking for an opening. Marcus turned with it, keeping his spear pointed at the animal's chest and his burning branch ready to strike. The other wolves watched silently, waiting to see the outcome of this confrontation between their leader and the strange human who refused to be intimidated. The attack came suddenly. The wolf launched itself at Marcus with incredible speed and power, its jaws aimed at his throat. Marcus had been expecting this moment, and his reaction was based on pure instinct and training. He dropped to one knee and thrust his spear upward, catching the wolf in mid-leap. The animal's own momentum drove the spear point deep into its chest, and it collapsed to the ground with a final growl. The other wolves stared at their fallen leader for a moment, then looked at Marcus with what seemed like a mixture of respect and fear. He had proven himself to be a more dangerous predator than they were willing to face. One by one, the pack members melted back into the forest, disappearing as silently as they had appeared. Marcus remained in his defensive crouch for several more minutes, listening for any signs that they might return. But the forest had grown quiet, except for the crackling of the fire and the baby's soft whimpering. "Are they gone?" Sarah asked in a whisper. Marcus nodded slowly, finally allowing himself to relax. "They are gone. Wolves do not usually attack when they have lost their pack leader. They will find easier prey somewhere else." Sarah began to cry with relief, holding her baby close to her chest. "I thought we were all going to die," she sobbed. "I cannot believe you fought off an entire wolf pack to protect us." Marcus sat down heavily beside the fire, exhaustion hitting him all at once. The adrenaline that had carried him through the fight was wearing off, and he realized how close they had all come to death. "We are not safe yet," he said after catching his breath. "We need to get you and the baby to proper medical care and civilization. This is no place for a newborn infant." Sarah nodded, but looked worried. "I am not sure I can travel very far yet, and I do not even know which direction to go to find help." Marcus had been thinking about this problem since the baby was born. The nearest town was over 40 miles away through difficult terrain, but there was a ranger station about 15 miles to the east that might be easier to reach. The problem was that Sarah had just given birth and would not be able to walk that distance for several days. "We will need to build a travois," Marcus decided. "It is like a stretcher that I can drag behind me. You and the baby can ride on it while I pull you to safety." Over the next 2 days, Marcus worked to build a sturdy travois using branches, rope made from plant fibers and animal skins. He also gathered supplies for the journey, including food, water, and materials to keep the baby warm and comfortable. Sarah recovered her strength slowly, but Marcus could see that she was a tough and determined young woman. Despite everything she had been through, she never complained and did everything she could to help prepare for their journey. The baby, who Sarah had named Hope, was thriving despite the challenging circumstances of her birth. She was nursing well and seemed healthy and alert. Marcus found himself fascinated by the tiny person who had entered the world under such dramatic conditions. On the 3rd morning after Hope's birth, they began their journey toward the ranger station. Marcus had created a comfortable bed on the travois using soft pine needles and animal furs, and Sarah was able to lie down with the baby while he pulled them along the forest trails. The journey was exhausting. Marcus had to navigate around fallen trees, rocky areas, and steep slopes while pulling a load that weighed over 150 pounds. But his 3 years of wilderness living had made him strong, and his determination to get Sarah and Hope to safety gave him energy he did not know he possessed. They traveled during the cooler parts of the day and rested during the hottest hours. Marcus hunted small game and gathered edible plants to keep their strength up. Sarah helped by keeping watch for danger and taking care of Hope's needs. On the second day of travel, they encountered another challenge. A mountain lion had been following them, probably attracted by the scent of the baby and hoping for an easy meal. Marcus spotted the big cat stalking them from a distance and knew they would have to deal with this threat before it decided to attack. This time, Marcus used his knowledge of animal behavior to avoid a direct confrontation. He made camp early and built a large fire, then created noisemakers from hollow gourds and stones. The combination of fire, loud sounds, and Marcus's confident behavior convinced the mountain lion to seek prey elsewhere. By the fourth day of travel, Marcus could see signs that they were getting close to the ranger station. There were more human-made trails, and he occasionally found pieces of litter that indicated other people had passed through the area recently. Sarah was getting excited about reaching civilization, but Marcus found himself feeling conflicted. After 3 years of solitary life, he was not sure he was ready to return to the human world. But he knew that Sarah and Hope needed medical care and proper shelter, and his own feelings were not as important as their safety. On the afternoon of the 5th day, they finally reached the ranger station. It was a small log building surrounded by a cleared area, with a radio antenna and government vehicles parked outside. Marcus could hardly believe they had made it. The park rangers were amazed by their story. They immediately called for medical helicopters to transport Sarah and Hope to the nearest hospital, and they insisted on checking Marcus over as well. The rangers were impressed by how well he had cared for Sarah and the baby during such a dangerous situation. "Son, you saved 2 lives out there," the head ranger told Marcus. "What you did was incredibly brave and skillful. Have you ever considered a career in wilderness rescue or park service work?" Marcus had never thought about turning his survival skills into a legitimate career, but the idea intrigued him. For the first time in 3 years, he was thinking about rejoining human society instead of running away from it. Sarah refused to leave for the hospital until she had a chance to talk privately with Marcus. She took his rough, calloused hands in hers and looked directly into his eyes. "I will never forget what you did for us," she said seriously. "You could have walked away when you found me, but instead, you risked your life to help 2 strangers. Hope and I owe you everything." Marcus felt embarrassed by her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same thing," he said quietly. Sarah shook her head. "No, they would not have. Most people would not have known how to help, and many would have been too scared to try. You are a very special person, Marcus. I hope you realize that." As the helicopter arrived to take Sarah and Hope to medical care, Marcus made a decision that would change the rest of his life. Instead of disappearing back into the wilderness, he decided to stay and explore the possibility of using his skills to help other people who found themselves in dangerous situations. 6 months later, Marcus was working as a trainee with the Park Service's search and rescue team. He had gotten his high school diploma through correspondence courses and was studying wilderness medicine and rescue techniques. His unique combination of survival skills and real-world experience made him incredibly valuable to the team. Sarah and Hope visited him regularly at his new job. Hope had grown into a healthy, happy baby who seemed to love being outdoors. Sarah had started college and was studying to become a nurse, inspired by the medical care she and her daughter had received during their crisis. Marcus had also reconnected with some distant relatives who welcomed him back into their family. For the first time since losing his parents, he felt like he belonged somewhere and had a purpose that mattered. One evening, as Marcus was sitting outside the ranger station watching the sunset, Sarah approached with Hope in her arms. The baby had grown so much that she was now sitting up and reaching for everything around her. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said, sitting down beside him on the wooden steps. "I have been thinking about what to put on Hope's birth certificate for her middle name. I want to name her Hope Marcus, after the person who brought her safely into the world." Marcus felt tears come to his eyes, something that had not happened in years. That would be an honor, he said quietly. You gave us life, Sarah continued, not just by helping with the birth, but by showing us what real courage and kindness look like. I want Hope to grow up knowing that there are people in the world like you, people who will risk everything to help others when they need it most. As Marcus held baby Hope and watched her grab at his finger with her tiny hand, he realized that saving her and Sarah had actually saved him as well. He had found his way back to the human world, not as the lost and angry teenager who had run away 3 years earlier, but as a man with purpose, skills, and people who cared about him. The wilderness had taught him how to survive, but Sarah and Hope had taught him how to live. And in the end, that made all the danger and hardship worthwhile.